Okay.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Hi, welcome to another exciting edition of Color Me Poetry. Today, we have my good friend here with us. We've known each other for many years in the poetry community, and in the person of Hiram Guru. Did I pronounce your name?
Hiram Larew. Yeah.
Larew, yeah.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, man, it's been great having you. I've been trying to get you on for a long time.
I know, it's been a while.
And,
we tried to get together this past summer, and we had a problem here in the studio with the air
AC,
conditioning.
Yeah,
so I'm
I
really
was sweating
glad.
bullets, man.
Right.
But look, you've been writing for a long time, and your poetry, I mean, it's just phenomenal, man. So let's start with the beginning, and that is, how'd you get into poetry? Did you choose poetry, or poetry chose
That's
you?
a great question. First off, thank you for having me. I really appreciate that. I think poetry probably grabbed me. I was interested in poetry as a young kid, just like you. But yeah, I can remember back in high school writing some poems. And so I think it kind of reached out to me off the page and said, you got to do this. So yeah, I got started back then.
I remember an old song by Stevie Wonder. The lyrics said, "Something gonna grab you,
Yeah.
something gonna jump out the
That's
bushes
right.
and grab you."
Well, that's what it did.
Yeah.
That's what it did.
And so you've been doing it that long.
Oh, yeah, definitely that long.
What were you feeling when you?
Well, it
when
was
you
a
first
way
started?
for me to express things that maybe I just couldn't
you
express
shy?
other ways. I was kind of introverted, still am, but it was just a way for me to express some things that I couldn't otherwise. So
Express,
yeah. And since I retired about 4 years ago, I've had a chance to do a little bit more. Because poets come out at night. They're like bats. They come out at night, you know.
When the
And
spirit
when
come
I
down on you late at night.
That's right. And
Yeah.
when I was working, I just couldn't get out to a lot of poetry events. But I've been able to do that since
Well,
I
you've been
retired.
definitely making the rounds now.
Yeah, I've been busy, kind of, and it's all good.
I see you and the crew a lot of different places. I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, they're always together all the time.
Right.
The usual suspects, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, all the poets, yeah.
Yeah, there's just a wonderfully active and very strong poetry community here in
Yes, it
our
is.
area, in
That's
our
true.
county
In the DMV,
especially.
yeah.
And the DMV especially. Yeah, so it's good to be part of that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, you know, we were talking earlier about my good friend, Grace Cavalieri.
Yeah.
And she used to have, on WPFW, got to
Yeah.
give credit,
Yeah.
She used to have the poet in the poem.
Yep.
I know Grace since the 80s, really.
Poet and the poem still goes. Grace is still doing it, and she's doing that on top of being our new state, Maryland
Oh, yeah, you
poet
said that.
laureate. So she
Yeah,
is
of the
cooking with
state.
gas. It's amazing.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Grace, if you're listening, contact me, Poet Danny Queen.
There you go.
DRQ1227@AOL.com.
Yeah.
And I'd love to get you on here, my friend. I haven't seen them.
Grace should be in this seat.
She's going to
Absolutely.
be in this seat.
Yeah.
I don't care if she's 100
Definitely.
days. We're going to bring her in there. Because she's done so much.
Oh,
I mean, her
incredible.
archives is just
It's incredible.
amazing.
Incredible.
Yes.
She's a poetry force, a poetry
Yes.
saint. All of that, yeah.
And I remember being on her with on Poet in the Poem on WPFW, and then she would come down to Bowie and do my show, Color Me Poetry.
There you go.
At Bowie back
Well,
in the
you've been
90s.
doing this for a long time too.
Yeah, long time. So
Yeah.
it's been a blessing,
Yeah,
man.
yeah. Well, through
So-
it, you've showcased a lot of wonderful talent.
And I'm still looking for more. So there are poets and artists and poets, artists, anybody in the arts.
Yeah. Musicians, I know
musicians
you've had
as well. Yes.
Cliff Bernier on, who's a poet
Yes.
and a musician.
And I would love to have you on. You can give me a call at 202-251-7743 or DRQ1227@AOL.com. I'd love to have you on. Now, how with poetry for you? Do ideas grab you? Do you write the poem, or is your poetry more custom made? You write the title first. So how does it work?
it's interesting. I think we all have different ways of doing it,
Yes.
and even within ourselves, we each have maybe a variety of ways we do it. For me, it's kind of I'll think of a phrase or a catchword, and I'll kind of begin there. Danny, in my case, I don't know exactly where the poem will go. Sometimes
Well,
I
yeah,
have a
that's true.
little bit of a clear idea, but most of the time it's like, let's
You don't
start
know
and see where
where
the
it
poet
goes.
takes me.
You know, that's interesting
know?
you say that, Hiram, because I often say that creativity has a mind of its own.
It does. It
Yeah,
really
it
does.
You don't know. I try to begin with the end in mind, but you don't always know where the end gonna go.
Well, some poets, I think, do have a real good plan in mind when they sit down and they write a story through their poem, kind of a ballad almost. But for me, it's more, as you were saying, kind of where is this poem going to take me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always started with the the title.
Have you?
I start from the title. Yeah.
Sometimes I do.
Tailor-made.
Sometimes I put the title on afterwards, but that's interesting. So you always begin with the
Always
title.
begin with the title. So anything you
Interesting.
see I've ever written, it started because there's
Okay.
something about the title that sticks out to me, that just grabs me.
Interesting.
And won't let me. Always the title.
That's
Now
cool.
there's some poets, and I have this good friend of mine. She was on the show. She's like 28, 29 now, but I knew her when I worked in the school system. She was just like a kid. She was about 13, 14, about
Oh
14
wow!
when I met her.
Wow!
And she always writes poems, and she said they're untitled. I said, well, if you're gonna untitle it, you got to be titled, untitled 1, 2, 3,
Right,
something.
right.
I mean, because you got to
Right.
call it something.
Right.
You know. So yeah, but different poets, different writers write in
Yeah.
different ways.
You know, you mentioned the young people too, and I just want to be very proud of the fact that our county, Prince George's County, has, as far as I know, one of the only youth poet laureate programs run by Patrick Washington and Neville Adams, and they've just done a terrific job of elevating the importance of the young person's voice in poetry. So it's one of the few in the country, I
Now,
think.
does that come under the arts?
It
Council?
is supported by the Prince George's Arts and Humanities Council. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's
That's
held
great.
every year.
Really?
And it identifies some wonderful young poets every year. Yeah.
Well,
So-
I can't be a part of that.
so it's something that we should be proud of.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that because
Yeah.
I wasn't really familiar with
Yeah, that would be cool if you could have a couple of the poets,
I certainly
young
would.
poets. Yeah,
I certainly
can
would.
put you in touch with
Yes,
Patrick. Yeah,
give me-
he does a great job.
Yeah, give me
of
the
that.
hookup. I'd love to have them young people on. And I've had some young people on, but I'm always interested in having young poets on
Sure.
all the time. Matter of fact, a couple weeks ago, I had a teacher on who had a book of poems that he had published for some of his students.
Okay,
And
cool.
some of the things that they were saying were just, I mean, young people, they were just amazing.
Oh, they are.
I'm
They
like,
are.
wow.
And I think they can speak to the heart maybe even more so than we adults can. I mean, they really connect. You know,
That's
they-
a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
All right, we're talking poetry. Let's read some poetry.
Sure.
What you got for me, Hiram?
Well, I was lucky enough about a year ago to travel to Ireland, country of Ireland, and I went because I had a writer's residency
Now, are
there.
you Irish?
No, I don't. Well, I think maybe I've got a little bit of Irish blood in me back many generations. But I went to write at this cottage, which was wonderful, about hunger. I've been real interested lately and started an initiative called Poetry X Hunger, and went to Ireland to learn more about the great potato famine that occurred in Ireland 1845 to 1849 and caused all kinds of starvation, caused all kinds of immigration to the U.S., to Canada, and to Australia. So I wrote this piece. It briefly mentions something about that potato famine. It's called Aqua Sound. I was staying on what's called Aqua Island, and to get to it, you crossed a body of water called Aqua Sound. So it's a fairly short piece. Aqua Sound. When the roads curve like sound and dip as if lifting to bow, whenever all thoughts round or cluster, or when hearts call down, is Ireland. And as rich when poor was, or as wise as bare heads in snow seemed, and as twigs so frail broke into song, and as true as any blight or potato could be, was Ireland. So, when sand laps the senses, or salt drips the edges as dreams, whenever hope streams through such heavens, and moss comes home, or hearts beam down, is Ireland. I fell in love with Ireland, Danny, and
What's
so
it like?
that's I was there this time of year, so it was kind of brown, green. I had beautiful weather.
Seasons were changing.
Every road you took, I saw water, and I loved that. So, yeah, the people were very, very nice, but really, I met landscapes when I was in Ireland, and
Lot of
it was
landscapes.
just beautiful. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
yeah,
You took
yeah.
pictures?
So I did take a few pictures. Yeah,
Oh,
just
wow.
a few. Yeah, yeah.
And so that was the inspiration behind that.
That
piece.
was kind of the inspiration behind
Wow.
that piece.
Now, is that in the book or it's going to be in the
No, that's a fairly new piece, so
Okay.
that will hopefully be in a forthcoming book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. What else you got for me?
Well, I've got several others. Let me take a time out for just a second and say we were going to be joined, as you know,
Yes.
by Miss Cayenne Thomas,
Yes,
who's a wonderful
absolutely.
poetic force in the greater DC
Shout out
area.
to Miss
And
Cayenne.
hopefully you'll have a chance to
Oh,
have
we
her
have her
back.
back, no question.
Absolutely. But I did want to mention that she has recently begun a really important initiative called the Inkwell to bring poetry to bear with people who are in need of healing. And so she's going to be having her annual poetry gathering, it's called The Gathering, through her group called Cayenne Inc. on Saturday, December 7th from 6:30 to 9:30 at the Ark in town on Mississippi Avenue.
Oh, okay.
And most all the funds raised there will be made available to begin this really important initiative called Inkwell.
Inkwell. That's
to
interesting.
help bring poetry to communities in need of healing. So I just wanted to provide that. Then a short poem that I've got. My father, who's no longer with us, I never remember him cursing. Never,
Really?
as long as I live,
Wish
I
I
can
could say
remember.
that.
Well, yeah. I mean, it was kind of an unusual situation. I don't think he ever cursed, but when he got frustrated, he for some reason used this phrase called, he would say, "Boy, howdy." Now, I don't know where that came from, Danny. I don't know. But
How would you
this-
translate that?
I don't know. I think he would try to say, he would use it for when he wanted to say, good grief. But he would say, boy, howdy. So this poem.
My dad would say, "Boy, what the hell?"
Yeah, exactly. I think most of us would say something like that. But this poem then is called Boy Howdy, and it's kind of an homage, a thought piece about my dad.
Okay.
It says, it goes, modern life hurts me. Would that I could die in the arms of seed catalogs, or turn over in my bed and feel snow coming in the window. My father taught me to wave at life from cherished corners. His coat pockets were really my teenage years. Carry on is how I feel now. So may these lines in this poem become as strikingly handsome as hands on shoulders. May these lines cause strangers to look up again and again. May the hope in these lines age well like chewed pencils, or turn into stale crumbs that birds will fight over. So my kind of homage to my dad.
Wow. I like to share this piece.
Sure.
And it's simply entitled Wings of a Natural High. If you're not afraid to try, ain't no way life can pass you by. Because when you know who you are, you can fly on the wings of the wind. But you got to know you got the power within. And so long as nothing beats a failure, better try. Let me live my life on the wings of a natural high. I've been down, but I ain't never been out. And I've hit rock bottom enough times to know what I'm talking about. Somewhere beyond and above, the breath of life is God's gift of love. Through all pain, heartbreak, and strife, I'm simply hooked on the high of life. And so long as nothing beats a failure, but a try. Let me live my life on the wings of a natural high. Natural high.
You kind of memorize that, which makes it even that much more powerful. And I'm not sure if our viewers can see it, but that's a centered piece down the middle of the page, which
It is.
also adds power to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's interesting because each poem you write takes on a different form. And then we can just, I don't know, Tony, can we get a shot of this? It's like each poem you write, the form is different.
That's right. That's right.
And
that's right.
I thought about
And
that
kind of
sometimes.
reflects a little bit of what you're trying to convey in the poem too. I think. Yeah.
And E. Cummins does some interesting things before.
Oh yeah.
doesn't he?
Well yeah.
Oh,
Mr.
interesting. I'm like,
Cummings.
wow.
Oh right. Wow. Is right.
Goodness
Right.
gracious.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so I always noticed that, man, that, that form takes on a whole nother life.
Well,
if you will.
unfortunately, I can't memorize like you do. That's great. It sounds like you could have almost stood up and performed that without the piece in front of you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I probably could.
Yeah.
I probably could do Pay Me My Money.
There you go.
Also.
That's one of your signature pieces.
Yeah, I
think.
know I could do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, what you got?
Well, a couple of other projects that I thought people might be interested in.
Okay.
There's been a lot of attention here in the last several months on the historical estates around the country, particularly in southern states, and how they tell their story about the plantation home with or without acknowledging the incredibly powerful story, often untold, of the enslaved community that built the house and maintained it.
Oh, so they just talk about the home, but they don't talk
Pretty
about
much. Joshua Johnson, Mr. Johnson, on the radio here about a week ago, had a program on where he interviewed docents or the visitors guides at some of these places and asked them, how are you handling that backstory? It was fascinating. I had a chance this past summer to visit one of those plantations here in our area. It's in Fairfax. It's called Woodlawn. It's a beautiful, beautiful spot. It was property that was owned by George Washington. Here's the backstory. There were 9 white residents in the home and 90 slaves that made that place work. I mean, they put it together, they built it, they maintained it. It was only because of them that those 9 white residents could stay there.
Yes.
And so I had a chance to visit Woodlawn as a writer. And I invited in 3 wonderful African-American poets here in from our area. You know them all.
Okay.
Lady Di,
Yes.
Beverly, Diane Wilburn Parks,
Yes, my
and
friend.
Patrick Washington, who does the Youth Poet Laureate program.
My partner's in crime.
There you go. And they came
love
for
it.
one day to Woodlawn, and I asked them if they would just please soak up everything there and write about what they were feeling. And so out of that work, or out of that time, they wrote some incredibly powerful poetry about that backstory of ancestors who were there on the plantation. That's enslaved community, their story is completely untold. And all of that to say, we're hoping then to present all of our work, the 4 of us together, in what we call the Voices of Woodlawn. And so stay
really?
tuned on that. But we're
So
really,
this gonna be a
really,
publication?
well, it's either going to be a publication and or presentation around the area to try to bring voice to that experience that we all had visiting Woodlawn and trying to evoke and give voice to all of the folks who were there whose story is basically untold. I don't have a poem today about that, but
Voice for the voiceless?
Yeah, voice for the voice. Exactly,
Yeah.
voice for the
Well,
voiceless.
when you guys get ready, I'm gonna bring you all.
I'd
in.
love it
And
if we
all-
could come on.
we
That
all
would be
come and
great.
share it
That
right
would be
on.
wonderful.
Yes.
Here a while back, basically because of the election, most recent election, I began to kind of wonder about, well, how can poetry, can it help in any way for all that we're going through right now? And I wrote this what I call mini or even micro essay. If you'd have time, I'd love to read it. It's
we got
called The Power of Poetry. And it tries to get at what poetry can and doesn't do and why it's so powerful, because maybe it's not quite so powerful. The power of poetry. Poetry doesn't vote. It can't rule. It sits on no juries. It signs nothing into law. It runs no companies or houses of worship. And it never, ever wins an Academy Award or Super Bowl or war. On all of these fronts that matter, poetry is powerless. And for that very reason, it's incredibly powerful. Poetry is our grins, our anger, your life, my death. It's the birds that stitch air overhead. It's the soul of night, the feast of day, and that ever-present caution that's really careless. Poetry doesn't decide. It doesn't provide. If it answers at all, it answers with questions. And to be honest, Poetry doesn't care. It cares as deeply as wells do, yes, but it never brings you water. It wants nothing from you except wanting. This is probably its most gifting power. And it soars when allowed to over just about anything else we can imagine. It's not the clouds above so much, but our need for them. Said all at once, poetry is powerful for what it cannot be and for the dreams it wants. If you should ever encounter a poem that makes you jump, ask yourself why. Most likely the answer, if there is one, will be from so far fully inside you that your ancestors will wink. Finally, poetry is really nowhere, and so it's just about everywhere around us. It lives in the corner of your eye. It watches everything from the side. Poetry is the best glancer of all. It also aches with whatever is gone, and it cheers, even raves, for what may never be. All to say, thank goodness and badness for poetry, and for our never being completely sure how powerfully potent it really is. So that's my love song to poetry, Danny.
Well, this is my love song to Trump.
There you go, there you go. There you
And
go.
it's simply entitled The Trump Card, subtitle, Don't Trump the Truth. When sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity meet, he puts his foot in his mouth and trips over his own feet. Ultimately vote against their own best interests out of fear. And Trump is the mastermind at telling folk what they want to hear. As a predatory demagogue and a wolf ticket salesman on the prey, the ringmaster manipulator has hijacked the party and gone astray. As the great grand wizard of the politically deaf, dumb, and blind, the Trump nation behind the art of the deal is a political Frankenstein. With a know-it-all, know-nothing approach to the issues at hand, his xenophobic, inflated reality is an ego-driven Trump card brand as a racist, sexist, narcissistic, idiot, arrogant, insulting, rudely uncouth. And just because he speaks his mind don't mean he won't lie on the truth. The GOP nightmare nominee is off the cuff but on the stump. The trumped-out loose cannon is who he is, Donald Trump. No matter who you are, what you've done, or where you've been, fortune and fame won't trump the truth of who you are within. Like a crazy cartoon character from a scene from Looney Tunes, the dingbat Donald is a deadbeat, pathological, clueless buffoon. As a brass, brazen, bossy, abrupt, hostile, sandbox bully at play, he refuses to own up to the asinine, off-the-wall things he say. As the great grand wizard of the politically deaf, dumb, and blind, Trump is the Trump nation behind the art of the deal is a political Frankenstein. When sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity meet, he puts his foot in his mouth and trips over his own feet. The Trump card. Don't trump the truth.
Danny. And if I could pound on the table, which I know I'm not supposed to do here in the
I don't
studio,
pound on it.
but like, go Danny. So when did you write that? I mean, was it just in the last month or two, or
this
about a year ago?
No,
or?
I wrote this one actually before. This is 2016, before he actually became quote unquote president.
Well, you saw this all coming then.
I saw the handwriting on the wall.
Yeah.
And so actually, this is the first, but I've written 10 other Trump pieces besides.
Well, you need to put together a Trump
book.
collection.
Yeah.
Goodness.
Yeah.
We're down in it.
If I do a collection, I'm gonna call it All Trumped Out.
There you go. That's a great title. That's a great title.
Yeah. So it's a piece that I was compelled to write. And then I can't think of the name of the latest piece. I've written so many.
Yeah.
He's great great material for artists, man.
Yeah, you certainly
Not
is.
just comedians either.
No. For those of us who are concerned about the world, yeah. So, well, good for you, and congratulations for writing
Now,
that.
we want to do more poetry, but I also want to talk about your books. Let's talk about the books.
So I have 4 books that have come out over the years, and this one here,
You gonna read something from there?
Sure, I've got
Okay,
one piece in
great.
here that I can read from. This one
And
is
this
called Undone. The book, the
okay.
collection is called Undone, and it was published last year.
Okay, where'd the title come from, Hiram?
Well, it came from a poem that I wrote titled Undone, but it also kind of came from poetry undoes me in a good sort of way. And so I love the single word title, and I just love the notion of being kind of undone by it all. Okay, so Danny, I'm getting a little bit older, like all of us, I guess.
Well, yeah.
And this piece is I've always been interested in kind of a little bit of history. I'll never be a historian, but kind of interested in history of where we've been, where our country's been, and so on and so forth. And this piece tries to kind of mash up that interest in history with just the observation of my getting a little bit older. It's called custard, like, pudding, like custard.
Right.
Custard. From this far away, the Civil War and Revolutionary War seem like custard to me.
Wow.
That's not to minimize their horrors, but it is to say that I have learned to accept my aging face and all the sweets that come with ghostings. It is to say that I've been like muskets along the way and now feel like ambush sparks. I've also bandaged ooze and piped whistles, and anymore I listen hard to whatever great-grandfathers growl from their bed whenever they want to. I've held West Virginia in my arms as any maiden aunt would, and I've tasted puddings and smelled cornfields. Nothing else surrounds my years as such knowing does. Nothing else silhouettes my insides as candles can, and surely nothing will ever race down my ravines, hat in hand, like these chills do. So that's a piece, Danny,
Wow.
that kind of mashes up the interest in history, if you will, and this phenomenon of getting a little bit on.
Now this
onward.
one just came out.
This came out last year, about this time last year.
But
yeah.
you had actually written the poems, a while ago?
Yeah. I wrote, the poems that appeared in here, probably I'd written over the last, I don't know, 5, maybe even 10 years. There's some fairly recent poems in here, and then there's some that, I'd written a while back that I put in here. Yeah.
Well, you know what? I'd like to hear something else from there. You got something else from there?
Oh, sure. Well, let me see here if I can
okay.
track another one down here. Give me just 1 second.
And I like the stories behind the poems, because they always seem to be a story.
Sure.
Behind the poem.
Let me look up here in the front. Here's one that I wrote when I love sunrises and sunsets. I mean, like we all do.
Wow.
And
that says something about life, though.
that's right.
Sunrise
That's right.
and sunset,
And just kind of the
because you just
glow.
talked about age.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And I think my appreciation for all of these has gotten greater as I've gotten a little bit older. This one I wrote. It's titled Unction, and it's kind of my sense of when I was looking at a particular sunrise. Unction. When the sun sneaks through trees as cream can, when clouds spike out to where calm flows, when every folded creek sings for the first time or forgets that it belongs, when more than even that almost whispers, like how rain lifts the mornings, when such quiet bends towards early roars, when all startings blend and my stories flock, when the sun sneaks under as nothing else does, or the light frays with chatter. I just remember being taken by this particular sunrise as being kind of an opening. And
Where were you? Remember where you were?
I don't right off the bat.